Partial invisibility, blur sphere, blur artifact, power down. This strange orb has got many names, as the pickup message tells you, and your weapon sprite also. This artifact turns Doomguy partially invisible. Enemies can still spot you, but their accuracy will be reduced when they attack. How does that work? Let's have a look, shall we? I mean, why else would you click on that elusive yellow thumbnail, right? When the player picks up a partial invisibility, a special flag internally named MF Shadow will be set for 60 seconds. There are two functions in the code that check if the target has the shadow flag set. The first function is A face target. As the name implies, this will adjust the entity's angle to face their target. The condition here will add a random offset of up to plus 44 to minus 44 degrees to the current angle if the target has the shadow flag set. The second function is P-spawn missile. Usually projectiles are shot at 100% accuracy towards the target, but when they have the shadow flag set, the projectile's angle will have a random offset of up to plus 22 to minus 22 degrees. Both these functions have quite some oddities, so let's go check them out. Let's start with A face target. All enemies will use A face target when they attack. Well, most of the time. Barons and Hell Knights miss an A-face target call when they toss their fireball, which can look quite humorous. Speaking of fireballs, since spawning projectiles uses a separate angle randomizer, the angle the enemy is facing may not correspond with the angle of the projectile. Lost Souls use A-face target to lock onto their target. This too will cause Lost Souls to have their angle randomized when the partial invisibility is involved. Same with Lost Souls spawned by Pain Elementals. Even those that spawn when the Pain Elemental dies will emerge charging at random angles, which is pretty nice, as most of the time they end up slamming into each other. A-face target is also used by hit scanners to aim at their target. The only difference is that this angle is then naturally randomized to up to plus 22 to minus 22 degrees. If the initial angle was already randomized because of partial invisibility, then this offset will stack. Logically, you'd say that it's a simple addition, where the maximum random offset will be plus 66 to minus 66 degrees. But because of how Doom's RNG works, that will not be possible. To reach 66 degrees, you need several high number RNG rolls in a row. But since the RNG table is predetermined, there's no such sequence. The range is actually more around plus 47 to minus 47 degrees. Well, that is, until shotgun zombies and spider masterminds are involved. Since they fire 3 pellets per tick, the RNG rolls can have a bit more variety. A pellet can hit a wall and spawn a puff of smoke. The puff of smoke makes RNG calls to determine a frame duration offset. When the pellets hit something, it will spawn blood, which also makes RNG calls related to the animation, but an RNG roll is also made for the pain chance. This will cause the second pellet to have an RNG value far away from the initial A-face target RNG call, which allows for a lot more variation compared to the other zombies attacks, which only perform 1 hit scan attack per tick. So for shotgun zombies and spider demons, the pellet spread with partial invisibility is slightly expanded, plus 56 to minus 57 degrees. So that's A-face target. Now let's have a look at P-spawn missile. As mentioned earlier, projectiles spawned through this function will have a randomized offset between plus 22 and minus 22 degrees. The following projectiles will be affected: Imp fireballs, Cacodemon lightning balls, Hell Noble fireballs, Arachnotron plasma bolts, Revenant's non-homing missiles, and Cyberdemon rockets. We purposefully left out one projectile because it's the only one in Doom 2 with a natural angle offset, the Mancubus fireball. One fireball in the first shot will have a plus 11 degrees offset. The next shot will have a fireball with a minus 22 degrees offset, and the final shot will have both fireballs with a plus 6 and a minus 6 degrees offset. Partial invisibility will affect both fireballs separately, creating some crazy scenarios, especially with the fireballs that have a natural angular offset. The first angled fireball can have a random offset between plus 33 to minus 11 degrees. The second one can have a range from minus 1 to minus 44 degrees, and with the third shot, both fireballs will effectively have their angles expanded to plus 28 to minus 27 degrees. Not all attacks are affected by partial invisibility, however. When Archvals conjure the flame attack, they will call A-face target for each sprite frame. Each angle will have a random offset when the target is partially invisible. Despite the funny dance movement and invisibility, the Archvals zap will always be 100% accurate. Melee attacks will also screw up enemy angles, but since enemy melee attacks are a simple point-to-point calculation, where no angles are involved, it too will always be 100% accurate. The Revenant's homing missile doesn't care for your partial invisibility. The missile may spawn with a random angle, but will soon correct itself and chase you down with 100% accuracy. What a bunch of cheaters. If you're wondering if the enemy's vertical aim is affected by partial invisibility, it isn't. We just talked about enemy attacks that are naturally inaccurate, such as hit scanners and the Mancubus. Let's do a fun experiment. We can do a simple test to see how many of their attacks land on a target that is standing still and determine their accuracy. Because distance is a factor, we'll place the target at 5 different spots: 2000, 1000, 500, 250 and 125 units distance between the attacker and target. Let's start with the hit scanners that fire 1 shot per tick: Zombie Men, Chain Gunners and Wolfenstein guys. It's worth noting that hit scan is limited to 2048 units, so any distance beyond that effectively turns the accuracy to 0%. At 2000 units, their accuracy is about 3%, so 3% of the shots will land at this distance. At 1000 units, it's 8%, 500 units, it's 16%, 250 units is 31%, and at 125 units, it's around 68%. Keep in mind that these numbers are theoretical estimates. Missed shots caused by the epic block map bug are not accounted for. Let's compare it to when the target is partially invisible. At 2000 units, it's more or less the same at 2%. 1000 units doesn't change much, 3%. 500 units has an accuracy of 9%. 250 units, it's 17%, and 125 units, it's 35%. We can roughly determine that the accuracy is pretty much halved. Shotgunners and Spider Masterminds are different, as they have 3 hit scan attacks in one single tick, increasing the odds of any of the 3 hitting the target. Let's have a look at the natural accuracy first. Starting off with a distance of 2000 units, 9% chance 1 of the 3 pellets will hit you. At 1000 units, 24%. 500 units, 39%. 250 units, 73%. And at 125 units, you're almost guaranteed to get hit, 98%. At 2000 units, when the target is partially invisible, there's a 4% chance 1 of the 3 pellets will land. At 1000 units, it's 9%. At 500 units, it's 18%. At 250 units, it's around 37%, and at 125 units, it's around 57%. Again, partial invisibility more or less halves the accuracy. Just like hit scanners, Lost Souls and Pain Elementals use a phase target to aim at their target. There is no natural spread, but, of course, with partial invisibility, there is. 2000 units, 3%, 1000 units, 8%, 500 units, 15%, 250 units, 30%, and at 125 units, 65%. Shot projectiles are naturally 100% accurate if the target is standing still, with the exception of some of the Mancubus fireballs. Well, most of the time, when Doom's slopes decide to be precise. Not including the Mancubus ones, here's the accuracy of projectiles when partially invisible. At 2000 units, only 5% of the projectiles will be aimed at you. At 1000 units, it's 9%, at 500 units, it's 18%, at 250 units, it's 40%, and at 125 units, it's around 81%. Keep note that these estimations were determined with the smallest projectile available, like an imp fireball. Larger projectiles like Arachnotron plasma bolts will raise the accuracy percentage slightly as they cover a larger area that may overlap with the target's hitbox. Let's see how a bigger collision box affects the accuracy. 2000 units, 7%, 1000 units, 14%, 500 units, 25%, 250 units, 54%, and at 125 units, 90%. What about Mancubus fireballs? Both fireballs will do their separate RNG call for the angles. What are the odds either of the two will hit you when standing still? At 2000 units, it's about 7%, at 1000 units, it's 15%, 500 unit distance, it has a 28% chance, 250 units, it's around 52%, and at 125 units, there's a 90% chance it will hit an immobile target. Interestingly, these values are nearly identical to the Arachnotrons. For hit scan, these inaccuracies are useful, because hit scan is an instant attack. What this means is that these accuracy values are relevant for both mobile and immobile targets. For projectiles, however, the partial visibility ends up being quite a nuisance most of the time, especially when close combat is involved. Muscle memory will screw you over, and you'll end up running into projectiles you're trying to dodge. Spectres also have a shadow flag set. The accuracy of enemies infighting spectres is also reduced. This is something you'll almost never see, because enemies infighting with a spectre occur with pretty much no distance between the two. A phase target is called once to point the archvile towards the corpse he's reviving. So if the corpse is a spectre, the archvile's angle will have a random offset. Hard to notice, but it's a thing. The player's corpse will also be permanently shadowy when they happen to die with the partial visibility active. The shadow flag isn't only limited to players and specters. You can hack the flag onto pretty much any entity in Doom. Stuff like decorations, power-ups, and medikits will all show up with the fuzz effect. Yes, the fuzz effect. That's what the shadowy rendering is called internally. How does Doom handle that? It looks really cool, almost as if it's refracting light or something. Let's have a look. First, we need to talk about Doom's color palette. Doom's color range consists of these 256 colors. Anywhere you go in Doom, even the crazy colorful maps, are built out of these colors. You may be thinking, how is that possible? You've got the diminishing light, sprites and walls clearly get darker, and when you grab the radiation suit or take damage, there's clearly some color blending going on. Well, believe it or not, even with all that, it's still limited to these 256 colors. This is where the color map comes into the picture. What the color map does is determine the shade of the original pixel used in the first row. For example, the pixel of the Baron of Hell spec here is found in index 27. Then it darkens the pixel by going down the rows based on the Baron of Hell's light level. Not just that, but also which pixel to use when the player has the invulnerability vision. This is a very basic explanation of how the palette and the color map work. This will be explained in deeper detail in a future analysis video. So why is this relevant? Well, the fuzz effect uses the color map to take pixels from behind the sprite and darkens these. It does so by seeking the pixel's index on the color map's top row, then darkening them by using the same color index but on the 7th row instead. As you can see, the sprite is now transparent. What about the fuzz effect itself? This is done through the fuzz table. This is a table with predetermined vertical offsets. I'll step you through the process how this works. Sprites are rendered as columns from top to bottom. For each pixel, take the pixel of the background and darken it. Let's move on to the next pixel, but this time we also involve the fuzz table. The first index in the fuzz table is a positive offset, which means instead of taking the background pixel we want to draw, we copy the one below, darken it, and draw the copy. When we're done with this pixel, we increment to the next entry in the fuzz table. Moving on to the next pixel, this time the fuzz offset is negative, so we copy the pixel above. This one was already darkened, so it gets even darker. Draw it, increment the fuzz table index, and move on to the next pixel. A positive fuzz offset, so copy the background pixel below, darken it, and draw it. Basically, each time a negative fuzz offset appears, it uses a pixel that was already darkened. At some point, there are 4 negative offsets in a row, whose pattern can be spotted on the fuzzy sprite. The fuzz table has 50 entries, so when it reaches the end, it loops back to the first offset found in the table. The variable that keeps track of the fuzz table index is static, so when the new frame starts rendering the fuzzy sprite, it starts at a different index, creating a fuzzy animation. A very cool implementation indeed, but it has its flaws. Since the game picks pixels below or above the pixel that needs to be fuzzified, what happens if it picks a pixel that is beyond the screen? What do you do with a pixel that doesn't exist? Simple, just don't draw the pixel, Amal. The game checks if this pixel is part of the top row of the screen or the bottom. If that's the case, then skip the fuzzification of this pixel. This can be spotted in-game. As you can see, the weapon sprite is missing a row of pixels at the very bottom. Same with the spectre up here, the top pixels are gone. The fuzzy animation can also appear static. If the amount of drawn fuzzy pixels on the screen is divisible by 50, then it renders each frame with the same starting fuzz table index. The darkening of the sprite can also be flawed. Doom's palette of 256 colors can be quite limiting, especially when the color shading range is terrible. Take this magenta for instance. The shading is almost non-existent. It doesn't switch colors to grey until it's quite dark. Since the fuzz effect takes the 7th row of the color to darken it, what the hell do you do here? Yeah, not much. The fuzz effect won't show at all with these colors in the background. Fortunately, Doom barely uses these colors, only for Commander Keen's shirt, the Kako lightning ball, this lone pixel on the tech wall texture, light amplification goggles, and perhaps a bit ironic, the partial invisibility. But if you want to create a very fun map with this limitation in mind, make a map with walls and floors using this color only. Place specters everywhere, make the room full bright, and enjoy not being able to see specters at all. Or make it less evil and reduce the brightness, but place light amplification goggles everywhere that you need to dodge, otherwise the specters will appear completely invisible. Or perhaps some kind of deathmatch map, where grabbing partial invisibility is the new god power-up. I think there's plenty of fun stuff to do with the fuzz effect and Doom's scrappy color ranges. Well, as long as your victims use software rendering, that is. The partial invisibility for the most part is considered a meme power-up, and yes, it's very situational. Great against hit-scanning enemies, but when projectiles are involved, you'll just end up running into them. The fuzz effect rendering is fascinating though. It's so simple, yet great looking. It's truly one of those visual effects that aged like fine wine. Thanks everyone, the YouTube members, the patrons, and the following sexy nerds: Agonizing Oral Pain, Andri Dicklin aka Mark Hauser, Anthony Sicko, Art Cox, Beaks Make Me Coom, Ben of Langley, Big Gulps huh? Bitcore, Bofu, Bunderstorm, Choose Your Fights, Florida Man, Green Knight 9000, I Don't Funkin Know, John Hopper, Katsune Teku, Kirill Gorobets, Master Biggie, Matthias Sippert, Max Payne 67, Old Man Han, Omega Tyrant, Pete Peterse, Pyro Shi, Quake Gamer 632, Raven King, Riley, Robert Wakely, Sean Anana, Space Duck, Spectre, Steak Jacobs, Stephen Bone, Peko Kami, That Epic Fox, Thomas, Timothy Collar, Turbine 2K5, Victor Rick, and Who's Ace. Thank you all for the support. I'll see you in the next one.